All right. Are we on? Okay. Welcome everyone watching and those who are here. As you can tell, Brother Lumen's not here this morning, or Janie. He is. He's home. For those of you who don't know, he had a surgical procedure done, and he was in the hospital a couple of days. Now he's home and recovering. So everything went real well, and so he's home, and I wouldn't put it past him to be back Sunday, so at all. What? Judy's making faces. I don't know what I mean. All right. Okay. Let's turn to 2 Timothy chapter 2, and I want to talk about something that I've recently talked about in Wednesday night classes, and it's in these two verses, and it's in reference to the foundation that stands sure, or the foundation. In the Greek it says the foundation that is sure, therefore it stands. The nature of it is that it is sure, it is perfect, it is fixed and settled, and therefore it stands. And nothing that we do not do, nothing of us, period, nothing, the good or the bad, whatever we assess as good or bad, adds to or takes away from that foundation. The invitation to the soul is not to get in so you can add to anything or even run the risk of taking away. And it is to partake and participate in the sureness and the reality of what God Himself possesses as His own rest. And I've been confronted with that here lately, and I haven't really said anything about it much, just kind of here and there. But the phrase that we always use in this gospel is well, it's not just us. We quote Paul, who used it, or the New Testament, who used it over 200 times, in Christ, in Him, in the Beloved, in the Son of His love. All of those phrases that Kenneth Weiss always says, the spherical realm of Christ, in the sphere of. But when you look it up, and those of you who've heard these classes, every one of us have said it, is in the Greek a relation of rest. A relation of rest. And I've been talking about relationship with God. I've been talking about being known of God, and in that view, in that understanding, knowing even as we are known of God. But the phrase in Christ, and with that definition being so, a relation of rest, the question began to come in my mind, whose rest? Because I'd always assumed and taught and thought that it was mine. That it was my rest that God was interested in, my soul coming to rest, but it's not. And here it is that my soul can find rest, but first and foremost, primarily, it is God's rest. In Christ is, if you want to use that phrase, the sphere or the realm of God's own rest, which has not only caused me to rejoice, but it's also brought about every warning that you read in the New Testament. Every warning that you read of is in reference to that. God's rest being forsaken. God's rest not being entered into. God's rest not being received and being put aside, or there's so many different ways it's said in the Scripture, but when you begin to realize, I know since it's kind of begun to dawn in my heart that it is God's rest we're dealing with, you understand that there's something very weighty about this. It's not just, well, I can or can't. No, there's no other option. God has in His possession everything that He desires, everything He wants, everything. When I wrote the book Satisfied God, I began to see that the word satisfied in its etymology actually means that everything that satisfies your soul is found in the thing that you possess. So you could say, I'm satisfied. It's the word contained. It's contained in the very thing that you have is everything that satisfies you. That's where the word satisfied came from. And I even began to realize when you sit down at the table and you say, man, I'm full, I'm satisfied with what you've eaten, that you can't even use that word there because you'll get hungry again. When we say, when we're talking about God's satisfaction, we're meaning God has it eternally in His view, the thing that purely, perfectly delights His soul, and He has by His grace, and this is something of the grace of God, that He has brought His rest into my soul. Or He has brought me into His rest. Either way you want to look at it. But when you realize that the neglect is not that you would come short of His rest in state of being, but that you would neglect the rest that He has brought you to, there's something much more weighty to that and serious to that. And that you would settle for something less than a rest that God not only possesses but has fully supplied to your soul. Given. So that's something of what I've been looking at and something of what I want to talk about because, and I want to do it in light of these verses. 2 Timothy 2. I'm going to start at verse 16. But shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. And their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who concerning the truth have erred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrow the faith of some. Now, I dealt with that in the classes. I'm not going to even touch that today. Verse 19, nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are His, and let every one that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. And the thing I want to talk about is departing from iniquity today. And what I'm seeing something of what that means. But first, we have to see it in the light of something because this will bring us into something we'll get to in a moment. We've done this in our classes before, and I'm just going to I'm just going to do the skeleton of it, not get all intricate, but this is the tabernacle to some degree. The outer court, the holy place, most holy place. Imagine, if you will. That's what that is. But I've been looking at it in the light of this. And in our classes, the Known of God classes, we've been talking about this to some degree. And we spent some time talking about the encampment of Israel and God's orderly arrangement of the whole of Israel. Everything of the tabernacle, the cloths, the materials that it's made of, the encampment of Israel, the standards, the banners, all of the things that it symbolizes. We've talked about that in classes, and I think the last Sunday class I talked about it with regard to the anchor of the soul. And we saw how this entire encampment, because this is one of the testimonies of Christ and our salvation in Christ, but this testimony to me depicts something very, very specific and very particular that I think lends itself toward understanding this departing from iniquity. How God takes the entirety of an encampment, and basically it's just a greater, more concentrated, intricate view of God's statement concerning Israel. Israel is my son. It is God finally bringing the singularity of that phrase into something of a view where they can see it. Now, he beholds it first here. On the Day of Atonement, he beholds it here in another way than what they even can behold it. Because when they see him, he has all of the garments on representative of Israel. Here, he does not wear the representative garments. He goes in pure white linen, and most commentaries would say, or translate it this way, or interpret it this way, he stands there in the intrinsic righteousness of himself, that eternal purity and holiness of himself, accepted of God. He does not, these are my words, he does not stand here representing Israel. He stands here in the sight of God as the Israel of God. And they still don't understand. He's veiled from their view until he comes and appears. Say all that to say this. In this one man, God has personified and embodied an entire nation. Everything that has to do, everything pertaining to Israel comes to be singularly embodied in one man. In one man. And there's a lot that has to go into that, but that's just it in a nutshell. So, in the view of that, how God in this one man has identified the whole. He says in one place that he shall wear the mitre upon his head that says, Holy unto the Lord. He shall wear it forever that they may be accepted. And I thought that was interesting. It shall be upon his head that they shall be accepted. And I've been seeing that in the light of the offense and the rebellion of Korah and what that was all about. And we won't get into that today, but even more looking at how perverse the statement. It's the statement that religion talks about. It's the statement that you hear in every heart, every believer seemingly. This statement is on the tip of their tongue. Aren't we all holy here? We're all holy. Every one of us. We're all holy here. And I begin to see how perverse a statement that is in the light of the one that God has set in their midst, the only one that he made a mitre for that says, Holy unto God. That is something of what Paul is talking about, not holding the head. There is one head upon which that inscription is put. There's one head that inscription is found upon. And to say, we're all holy, aren't we? Isn't that what salvation's all about? God making us all holy? God making us all righteous? No. Salvation is all about beholding and living in the understanding and the judgment of the one holiness that he has given in the person of his Son. The one who stands before him holy and perfect. And that has something to do with departing from iniquity. Any Christian's eye falls on that phrase, depart from iniquity, we suddenly, and the first thing we do is start assessing ourselves. Have I done anything that's wrong? Because wrongness is one of the definitions of iniquity. To walk contrary to a law, to break a law, have a contradiction to a settled law. And we begin to look at ourselves. And of course, we look at yourself, guess what you're going to see? You. And there's nothing pretty there. There's nothing good in that picture. You could fool yourself and think there is because you've garbed yourself with enough fig leaves to cover up the ugly parts. But it's still ugly. Because God sees something great and perfect that doesn't have you or me as its reference point. The knowing of God has nothing of us as its point of reference. And that's why it's so sure and can't be uprooted. That's why that foundation will never be moved. That's why it's a stumbling stone. That's why it's the rock of offense. It is an offense when the natural man looks at how sure that is, because that's in absolute contradiction to my nature. It became us, that such a high priest became us, Hebrews says. Meaning we needed a high priest that was holy, harmless, undefiled. You know what that means? Not like us. He had in himself every quality that we lack. That's why it was necessary for such a high priest to come. That's why it's necessary. This one in his own intrinsic, eternal person stands accepted before God as the anchor and the sureness of the whole. The only moment there's insecurity and a thought of insufficiency is when he's veiled from their view. So, I know when people read this, they think what we do bad or what we consider evil. And although it can touch those things, I don't believe it's what Paul has in mind here. I don't think it fits with the context of these verses. I mean, he's talking, if you go up and look at these things, he's talking about obtaining, that he does all that he does so that they would obtain. The word obtain doesn't mean get. It means to experience something that's already a reality. Now, you can look it up in the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament and different ones, and they'll say that. It is to experience something already done. Paul says, I endure all the things that I endure, so that those to whom I preach, may experience the reality of which I preach. The reality of whom I speak. The reality that is already fully supplied to the soul. And then he goes on in these crazy sounding verses that sound like they really have nothing to do with what he just said. And he says, it is a faithful saying, if we be dead with him. And these all are in the aorist tense. They're not something that's coming. It's something that is. If we suffer with him, we shall also, that shall also is not in the future tense. Reign with him. If we deny him, he denies us. If we believe not, he abideth faithful. You see that? We deny, yet if we don't believe, he still abides faithful because he can't deny himself. Why? Because we're talking about something he possesses as his own rest. He won't deny that. He can't deny himself. He's faithful. What does Paul says he's faithful to? The fellowship unto which we have been called, the fellowship of the Son. We're talking about God dealing with the soul of man in accordance to something fixed. This one. I hate to draw a stick figure, but I'm talking about a person, not just a box. One standing here, perfect, accepted of God, that one becoming the view of our heart. The one who is God's eternal view becoming the view of our heart. So it's departing from iniquity. When you read that, I know it's hard just not to think about it, but it's not about what you do, what you don't do, how you're doing, how you're not doing, praying enough, fasting. It's not about any of that stuff. It's nothing that you can address that has you anywhere near it. Now, iniquity is not what you do. Iniquity is really who you are. And everything that pertains to who you are, which even means the theologies that we garb ourselves with. That's something of iniquity. That's really what iniquity is, because that is contradictory to a settled law. When God gave the law to Israel, that was his greatest act of grace to them. He didn't do away with Israel. He put them under a law, the law that was a testimony of his Son. In other words, he, in grace, clothed them with his Son in a testimonial way so that he could deal with them. Not just so they could deal with him, but so he could have a relation with them without destroying them. God, and to live in contradiction to that law was death or separation from the congregation, which is the same thing. So I want to talk about that, departing from iniquity. Within the context of what Paul's saying, the sure, settled foundation of God's own knowing or God's knowing, it seems that iniquity would refer then to transgressing against that knowing. A transgression in reference to his knowing. I read a Weiss commentary on this, and I want to read something of it, because at first, when I first read it, I had some not so good thoughts about it, and probably impure thought about it. But I didn't like it. I didn't like what he said at all. I thought it was just totally garbage. But see, that's because I read it looking at me. I know that's what he probably meant. But when I began to consider the words, I began to realize this is absolutely right. But it's only right if you attribute it to the proper man. Okay? So let me read this. This is his commentary about departing from iniquity. And he's right about this. This is you could say two different inscriptions on that foundation that is talking about having the seal. And these are the two parts of that seal. The first part of that seal is the eternal, the objective reality of God knows those who are his. And then there's what I'm seeing as in this departing from iniquity, the subjective reality of a judgment that takes place when the knowing of God is being worked in the soul. It is actually, if you look at it, knowing even as we are known of God. It is the judgment, the working, that being formed in us of God's own knowing, separating the soul from everything that is contrary to his own knowing, his own understanding, his own view. And we're going to look at that view in a moment, but he says here there are two inscriptions on this foundation. The one guaranteeing the security of the believer. The other, the purity of the church. The two go together. Now, there was nothing wrong with those statements as I read them, but I thought this was just heretical. The purity of the church is indispensable or absolutely essential, necessary, to its security. And see, I thought that was, I said, yeah, I know where you're coming from because I was in that. You know, I'm good at shutting stuff off because I was there. Psst. But when you attribute it to the proper thing, to the proper man, you realize this is absolutely true. The purity of the church is essential to its security. It can't be secure. There can be no sureness to your salvation except there's purity. Because God can't look upon anything else. But you put your faith in that, and there's a lot of complications that come about. That demands you assess yourself and your doings and all of the things. That almost demands that, or it does demand that. The other demands my soul to be unveiled to God's view. When the true object of this purity and security comes in, you realize it's all embodied here. That's why it's important that he went into the Holy of Holies, clothed with nothing but pure white linen, which is the righteousness of the saints. See that? That to me, that when you read that in Revelations, pure white linen, you're talking about this one here, them being clothed with this one who wears the pure white linen garments. He's the one who stands there, accepted, holy, and his purity is the security of the whole. In this one, the whole is identified and accepted, and because this one lives, they live also. Because he is accepted, they are accepted. But they can have nothing of that separated from who this one is. The iniquity that comes in to the picture is when I try to stand here beside him. And that's what Korah and his company were attempting to do. And that's why there was such fury brought into that situation. It's not because God is reactionary because we make poor decisions. It's not about him reacting based upon my decision. It's about this. He will deny us if we deny him. Oh, he denied me, so, that's how I thought. If I was God, yes. There would be a lot of flaming people running down the highway. They don't, boom. But God's not like that. He's not reactionary. He has set something in order. There is a fixed reality. He has settled it. It is fixed. And if you live in a contradiction to that, you have automatically denied him, and as a consequence, you are automatically denied of him. It's just settled. If you believe not on the Son, Jesus says, he is condemned already. He that believeth not is condemned already. It's not God reacting to your disbelief. It is a situation of how you have handled the light that has come in the world. Have you received that light or rejected that light? In not receiving the light that has come in, you are condemned already. There are so many verses that I've been looking at lately. We'll get into Romans 3. If we don't, tell me, and I'll get to it because I want to look at that. But Romans 3, shall the unbelief of some make void the faith of God? God forbid. It can't sway his understanding, his faith, his faithfulness. His faith determines his faithfulness. His understanding determines what he is faithful to. So both words can fit there, but if you willfully sin, Hebrews says, there is no more sacrifice for you. Why? It's not because he just says, no, you're not going to be able to come back in. What he's saying, because we think that means that we're damned forever, what that means is there's nothing left there that you can go back to and try to find reality. God has already brought about his reality. He has no other option for you. Where are we going to go? You alone have the words of life. What other option is there? The other option's off the table. And the understanding of that is what I'm seeing to be what it means to depart from iniquity. Now, I'm sure Brother Wiest or Kenneth Wiest meant that our purity ensures our security. The more pure we are, the more secure we are. But that's not it. I think every attempt we make at our own purity, the more we bring iniquity into the picture. The purity and the security of our salvation can only be attributed to the one perfect Son standing in our souls crying, Abba, Father. That's the only purity you've got. That's the only purity, therefore the only security you got. It's all bound up with God's understanding, God's view, God's knowing. That's why this foundation that is forever settled and sure, that every man that's ever come up to it has stumbled upon. This is the foundation rock you must also fall on and be broken or be ground to powder by it. It's that same foundation, and that foundation has this twofold, double-sided, objective and subjective seal on it. God's knowing, sure and settled, fixed forever in His understanding. His knowing is forever fixed. Therefore, there must be the judgment of that knowing working in our hearts, separating or departing, causing my soul to depart or be circumcised in understanding from everything it's already been cut off from in reality. It's about the soul apprehending that for which it is apprehending, so that the soul in that understanding would come to know the only true and sure and pure place that I have in this state of being or situation is to be found in Him, not having my own righteousness. That's it. And that's not an excuse to flesh. That's not an excuse for me to do or be or whatever I want. That is a judgment that must come. It's not. When you say that it can't be secure aside from perfect purity, I agree. But again, we must see perfect purity in the perfect face of Christ, who is made unto us the perfection of Himself. In the light of this, I believe departing from iniquity is separating ourselves from that which is contrary to and falls short of God's eternal knowing, His divine perspective, the view that beholds one life. But such a separation is not a matter of willpower. It's not a matter of zeal and religious zeal. It is an experienced judgment. It is God's understanding coming in and casting down every imagination of my own heart that would set itself up above God's knowledge, the knowing of God. And whether we want to admit it or not, that is the intention of every thought of man, is to set itself above his understanding. Because his understanding is singular. That's why this foundation is a rock of offense, because it's singular. How offensive is it to choose between Ishmael and Isaac to the natural mind? Esau and Jacob. How offensive. My God, how can he do that? That's why the Hebrew word there, or the Greek word when he talks about it in Romans 9, is actually scandalon, which means scandalous. It's a scandal to the natural mind. The cross is a scandal. It is something that does not make any sense because it leaves one. He has put away everything that is contrary to this law, the law of one life, the law that he clothed Israel with. That was his son. That was it. It was not about principles to live by. It was one life living. As long as they walked within the context and confines of that life, they were fine. It is my soul in judgment of his life, of his appearing, being separated from everything that is contrary to his understanding, his perspective. That view that beholds one who is holy, undefiled, harmless, separate from sinners, who is made higher than the heavens. Remember Korah saying, "You set yourself up above us, don't you?" No, not us. There is one above. And the soul just, the man wants his place. The what about me type of theology. Departing from iniquity, to me, is about whether or not we are walking in, living in the acknowledgement of an agreement. Now listen to the way I've said that. The acknowledgement of an agreement that grace has brought into our hearts. What is that agreement? As the Father knoweth me, so know I the Father. I started the classes about being known of God in Amos chapter 3, where he says to Israel, "Israel, my son," he says to them, "You alone have I known. You only have I known among the nations. Therefore I will punish you because of your" what? Iniquity. Therefore I will punish you because of your iniquity. Can two walk together except they be agreed? The word agreed there is from the root, it's yod in the Hebrew, from the root moed, which means in the same place, the gathering, the place and time of God's appointment. Can two walk together except they be in that same place, that appointed place, appointed time of the Father? I see that agreement not really with me, my soul finally agreeing with God, but God's agreement. That agreement can also mean a covenant or a relationship. It is God's covenant, agreement, relationship being revealed in my soul, and my soul coming to an acknowledgement of that agreement, of that covenant. That is my only life unto God. That is my only standing before God, and walking in that understanding, walking in that comprehension. It is Abba Father being revealed in the soul. The greater my soul's apprehension of the sureness of God's knowing, here in this one man who stands there, the greater the experience of an inward separation from what is contrary to it. Again, that is knowing as we are known. The departure, again, is not a matter of willpower. It is an experienced judgment as the knowledge of God is revealed. Remember Nehemiah, Ezra, in that story when they finally, everything's, I think, finished, and then they find the book of the law, and Ezra gets up to read the book of the law. And it says, as he read the law, there were others who were in the midst of the congregation who were listening to him as he was above them reading the law. They would go out and not only hear him read it, but give the understanding of what was being read. To me, that's what has to happen. Not just have teaching and reading and agreeing. That's true. Man, that's good. And giving some kind of mental assent to the clarity of it and the truth of it. But the meaning of it being revealed. And when that happened, when the meaning of it came into view, what happened? They departed from or separated from themselves all the mixed seed. Because only one seed could remain here. Only one seed had place here. There was no more place for the mixture. No more place for the iniquity. Me, you. That only comes when the understanding of the law, or the person, the truth of the law, the life of which the law testified, is revealed. And when that law is revealed, you see there's no room here for anything else. It's like I go back to this one a lot. You see that in Daniel with the stone that keeps growing until there's no place found for anything else. It just grows and takes over. And then you see again the one on the throne in Revelation. It said heaven and earth fled from his appearance or his face because there was no place left for them. That's what happens in a greater understanding of that one who sits upon the throne. Iniquity is removed, and our soul is removed from it. There's a circumcision that takes place inwardly. Now we can substitute every external circumcision we want. It's not going to work. It's still iniquity. It's still contrary to the knowing of God, because the knowing of God is singular. And as long as the soul is ignorant of that singularity or rebels against that singularity, destruction, death is always the result. No matter how good your intention. The seal is both objective and subjective. Knowing even as we're known, being judged in the light of that knowing. Now, in the light of that, let's go to Numbers. I know I've said all these things before, I guess, but Numbers 23. I'm going to go there, but this reminds me of Hebrews 2. Hebrews 2. I began to just think about this. It just started to dawn on me an order that's present in Hebrews 2 in the context of the whole letter of Hebrews. We know Hebrews is about a transition from the first to the second, from the types to the substance. And Paul, the writer of Hebrews, or Paul, I believe, but bringing them, trying to declare to them that the better, the greater, the more substantial, the reality of those things has come in the person of the Son in whom God has spoken, so that they could make inwardly. They had already come a state of being. The transition was already taking place, had already taken place. He's trying to bring them in the seeing of that Son, being carried on by the Spirit unto that which is perfect, that they would have that transition take place in their heart. But I begin to think about reading Hebrews 2. It's like immediately after he gives like the thesis statement of the whole letter, God hath spoken in Son. Everything he said, every way he said it, he's now totally comprehended in one, said it fully, perfectly fulfilled in one Son. He's now making this distinctions about him being better, Christ being better. And better doesn't mean just like I like this cup better than this cup. It means better in that it's superseding in excellence and nature. And so it never occurred to me, because it just kind of seemed just statements, but when he begins to talk about what is man, thou art mindful of him, and Son of Man, all of those things, and he says, he was this, you did that, but we see not all things now under him. He hasn't met that standard. What's the answer to that? But we see Jesus. And we've heard this a long time. I've heard it forever too. I've talked about it a lot, but it never really occurred to me that was really the first thing that he addresses as far as the transition from the first to the second is man. And it just finally, I realized that always has to be the first thing addressed. I think it's the first thing that's addressed in my heart. Because unless we see the superior and superseding object, the superseding man, the more excellent life, the one who is better than man himself, realizing that man himself was never the intent. You and me, we were never the intent. It was never so we could get to that place where we rule the earth and reign. It was a testimony of another. And he's saying, we see Jesus. We've come to see the one who was the intended man. Because until you see that intended man, you're still going to look for you to be that intended man. And what you're going to do is look for all the external things of the testimony you can and grab hold of them and try to make that man what you think he was intended to be. So man has to first be addressed as superseded by another. That there is another man who is better. We see him. That's the necessity. Because I don't think you'll ever be brought from the true things of the testimony until you're brought to see that there is a man who is more excellent. There is a man who is better. And that is not said so we can finally, God help me be like that man. He's better than me. Let me be, no, it's my soul come to know the judgment of, and finally in that the thanksgiving of, and rejoicing in, not I, but Christ. That's but we see Jesus. Not I. How do you fulfill the law, Paul? How do you live unto God? Not I. Christ liveth in me. That's but we see Jesus. So, Numbers 23. And I say that because of something that's here that I want to look at. And I've said it before, maybe not with this emphasis, but said it before. We know this is Balak and Balaam. Balak attempting to get Balaam to curse Israel. And so he takes him to a high place so he could see Israel. And I'm going to read some verses here. Chapter 23, verse 8. Verse 7. He took up a parable and said, Balak the king of Moab hath brought me from Aram out of the mountains of the east, saying, Come, curse me, Jacob, come defy Israel. How shall I curse whom God hath not cursed? How shall I defy whom the Lord hath not defiled? See, there's something settled there. He can't, if I can use the term, screw up. He can't bring a curse into this. That cursed thing, that cursed man, whatever you want to say. Verse 9, for from the top of the rocks I see him. I love that. That's actually there. That's not 99.99 in the straw. That's actually there. I see him. And from the hills I behold him. Lo, the people shall dwell alone and shall not be reckoned among the nations. Separated. Sanctified. Then, chapter 23, and there's so much there, I could stay there forever, but here's what I want to look. Verse 20 of the same chapter, Behold, I have received commandment to bless, and he hath blessed, and I cannot reverse it. I love that. Isn't that good? This is something that can't be reversed. That's why it's a sure foundation. That's why it's a rock of offense. Doesn't move because you want it to. He hath not, listen to this, this is the thing. This is where I want to go. He hath not beheld iniquity in Jacob. Neither hath he seen perverseness in Israel. The Lord his God is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. Surely there is no enchantment against Jacob, neither any divination against Israel. According to this time it shall be said of Jacob and of Israel, What hath God wrought? I love that. He hath not beheld. Now just think about this. Now these are stiff-necked, hard-hearted, bunch of crazy people he's having to rebuke constantly. Yet, when God's view is revealed to this man, he says God doesn't see iniquity in Jacob and no perverseness. Now if we were to read the stories, we wouldn't have that assessment. Even if you go to chapter 25, they start whoring or committing whoredoms in Moab. That's right after this declaration is made. That didn't change this view still. Nothing previous or after changed this view. That's not, again, I know when I say this, I run into people who think I'm making excuses for the flesh. No, I'm showing you the certainty of the soul, the certainty of salvation, the anchor, is a sure and fixed reality. And the thing is, it's so weighty that it's never going to be reversed. It never can be moved or removed. And you either participate in it or you don't. You miss it in experience or you forever attempt to get there. You either rest in this view or you try to see it in some other way. But I'm going to show you the only way that it can be seen, because Balaam experiences it. There is nothing perverse, nothing of iniquity found there. Nothing. God, man, I can't say that looking at me. I can't say that looking at myself. You can't say that looking at you. Even our righteousnesses are filthy. That's because we have righteousness all wrong. We don't even understand the true meaning of it until this one's revealed. We apply righteousness to the flesh and think that means what? That defines it. Didn't even exist except he be the meaning of it. Now, chapter 24, verse 1. I'm going to show you something, because again, I said this can't be seen but in a particular way. We're trying to behold this in another way. We're trying to see no iniquity in Israel, no perverseness in Jacob, no iniquity in me and you, no perverseness in us, looking at us. You can't do it. And when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he went not as other times to seek for enchantments, but he set his face toward the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes. Let me read this I got it here in the Young's Literal. This says it the way I want to read it. He set his face toward the wilderness, and Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel abiding in his tents, according to their tribes. The Spirit of God came upon him, and he took up his parable and said, Balaam, the son of Beor, hath said, the man whose eyes are open hath said. He hath said, which heard the words of the Lord. Oh, wait a minute, I'm reading King James. I thought that was kind of King James's. Yeah. Let me start here in the Young's Literal. Verse 2. Balaam lifted up his eyes and seeth Israel tabernacling by its tribes, and the Spirit of God is upon him. And he taketh up his simile, and saith, an affirmation of Balaam, son of Beor, an affirmation of the man whose eyes are shut. That's the literal version. King James says open, but it's actually shut. The man whose eyes are shut. An affirmation of him who is hearing sayings of God, who a vision of the Almighty seeth, falling. It doesn't say falling into a trance in the Hebrew. It just says falling. Just like everyone else that saw the Lord. Falling. And whose eyes are uncovered. You see the distinction there? I think that's why there's so much confusion in these verses. Everybody says open or open. Everybody says, well, this one is open. Why isn't this one open? Or this one should be open. If this one's open, it's a contradiction. No, it's not. He's understanding that the only way he saw this true vision is that these eyes were closed. And the eyes of the soul that God fills with his understanding are opened, uncovered, unveiled. And in that unveiling, he sees what these eyes could never see. In the understanding of God being revealed, he understands something that his understanding could never wrap around. Because all he could see, what was obvious to the natural eye, and that could be the whoredoms of Israel, the disobediences that they had, all of those things, you could see it, and that could be how you assess Israel. But God's assessment is greater. God is greater than your heart. You assess yourself and you see yourself lacking, but the reality that is in you is greater than that. Your assessments, your thoughts, your considerations with yourself in view. That's the only way we can see it, is the same way he saw it. These eyes being closed, not literally, but these eyes not be... Let's say it this way. We are not attempting to find the perfections of Jacob or Israel with these natural eyes. These natural eyes no longer are the things that we use to measure righteousness or anything else of spiritual life. The eyes of the soul are beholding. Now, did he see them? No. He saw the reality of which they testified. He saw the one of whom they were a testimony. How can I say that? Because it says it further on in chapter 24. Again, he talks about whose eyes are shut and then whose eyes are open. And then he says, I shall see him, but not now. He's talking about the Messiah, the one that would come, who was the fulfillment of this vision. shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. He shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth. That's the one he sees. And that's the one we must see, or else we're going to see iniquity everywhere we look, because the only thing we're going to see is us. There is no departing from iniquity as long as we're still in view. And again, this is not about just not looking at me. Oh, I can't look at you. I got to look at Jesus. It's about God revealing the superseding man, the man who is his intent, the life that he intended, and not only intended but has provided. When that life is revealed, we will never look at any other to evidence the perfections of that life. Especially us or anyone else. One of the things that intrigued me about this, and I didn't get into a lot of it, I'm out of time, but one of the things that, well, there's many things. Verse 19 of chapter 23 talks about that God is not a liar, or man that he should lie. And the Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown said, violate his faith. I love that. He will not violate his faith. He will not violate his knowing. That's what he's always working to reveal. But the word what's the word? Iniquity here in the Hebrew, that he does not behold iniquity, I thought was real interesting. We'd think evil and all of that, and it does have that. But mostly it talks about falseness or vanity. But its main, the first thing that came up in the definition is to pant. To pant. The deer panteth after the water. Like to pant because you're exerting your energy and you're giving out. Because there's so much energy, you're tired and you're panting for air. I thought, yeah. He doesn't see that in Jacob. He doesn't see that. Because he doesn't have to pant. He doesn't have to exert energies to be who he is. We do. We have to exert our energies to try to be who he is. Paul talks about being delivered from this evil generation, this evil age, is how he says it in Galatians. That word evil means full of toil and work and labor. Doesn't mean what we think evil is. It means it's full of labors trying to reach an end that God's already reached. Trying to reach a goal that God's already reached, and not only has he reached it, he's given it to your soul. And in vain you seek for something other. In vain you seek for something else. In vain you do exactly what Korah did. You're not sufficient. It's not sufficient enough for you that God has called you near to himself to serve him and worship him. You want the high priesthood as well. Aren't we all holy? You take too much on yourselves. And God tells them before he swallows them up in the earth, he said, tell the congregation of Israel, basically, you need to decide where you are. And you'll either be separated unto Aaron and live in the security of that relationship God has set in your midst, or you will be swallowed up. And it says that they were separated from the congregation of Israel. But before he says that, it says, you depart. Depart. Tell them to depart from these wicked men. So, what I'm trying to say is that departing from iniquity has nothing to do with the things we've thought it meant. Departing from iniquity is God's knowledge being revealed in my soul. This view that we just talked about. The one in whose face, remember the whole of Israel, that encampment, that order, Israel abiding in their tents, remember? We talked about how that all comes to be embodied in the singleness of one. It's this one he sees, really. And in that view, he sees no perverseness. He sees no iniquity. The only time we see perverseness and iniquity is when we're not seeing Him. Now, I'm not going to even qualify that statement. That needs to sink in, at least just in your mind, to think about. The only time we see iniquity is when we're not seeing Him. The only time we see what is perverse and what misses the mark and what... See, and even those things, we don't even know what that means until we see Him. You don't know what missing the mark is until you see it. You don't know what the mark is yet. You don't know what the goal is. You have no idea. You don't know what wickedness is. Looking at you, you think you know what wickedness is? No, because we'll divide that and make it good and evil. Now, God's view, it must supersede. God's view must come into the picture. And in that view being revealed in my soul, there is a true, inward, God-wrought departure from iniquity, from what is a violation of the law God has given. All right, well, we're out of time, so I'll stop there. Appreciate everybody being with us again. Now, let me just make a couple of things before we cut off. I sent out an email to the people that would be watching these classes about the changes that we have made on the website as far as our this will affect only our Wednesday night, our Bible classes, which take place Sunday afternoons with Daniel, and then Wednesdays Brother Luminice alternate, and Jimmy's is what, Thursday afternoon. Those classes are affected by this. When you go to our homepage, you'll see the Bible classes thing on the left-hand side, and or you'll see the Sunday classes, Monday class, and then you see Bible classes under that. When you click that now, where you used to see one screen, now you see 4 different screens. And the reason we've done that is to make it easier to follow a certain series of classes. Before, they just kind of piled on top of one another, and you had to, if you wanted to go through one series of classes, you had to skip over other classes to get to it. This way, it's all there. So what we've done is each screen has the speaker and the series over it, and you can just click on that. When the certain class is live, you'll see a little live red button on the bottom right hand of the screen. The bottom right of the screen is say live in red, and you just click on it and it'll bring up the live class. Also, if you go to Ustream, thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. If you go to Ustream to watch the classes, all you have to do is go to the search thing on the homepage and just type in CMI-DanielIsAPunk.com, and that'll get you to his class. That'll get you exactly. You'll see him. You type in CMI Daniel, it'll take you to Daniel's classes. CMI Rabon, it'll take you to my classes, and the other 2 you don't even want to listen to. So. CMI, nobody laughed at that. CMI Jimmy and CMI JW take you to the other 2. And that's real simple. So what we think it'll do is help navigate some things where they're not so confusing and to get to. So again, if you didn't get the email and you're saying, what in the world is he talking about, email us from the address on the screen now, and I'll send it to you. So with that, we'll call it an end to this.